Welcome to This Isn't Working, the podcast for employers and employees who think it's time to talk about the failings of workplace culture and how we can do better.
I'm Julie Scanlon.
And I'm Tanya de Grunwald.
Okay, let's get this working.
Hi, Julie.
Hi, Tanya. Good to be with you again.
And you. Okay, so today we're doing a deep dive into the new diversity report, which has just come out from the government. You're going to tell us, I just got the name of it wrong, didn't I? What's it actually called?
Yes, it's the Inclusion at Work report, which came out last week, and it was commissioned by the government, and an independent panel undertook some research over the last several months, and it's a bigger part of a bigger picture around inclusive Britain, I think it's called. But yeah, so it's quite a significant report for EDI professionals, I would say.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about what's in it, a little bit more about our kind of initial responses to it, and where we think maybe the industry will go next, and what we think will be the follow-up to this, if anything, and kind of any repercussions and kind of fallout from it. So who was actually on the panel? It was a bunch of contributors, right? Did I read there about 100 and something contributors?
Yeah, there were a lot of contributors. So there was a panel of about 7 or 8 people, which was chaired by Pamela Dow.
She was the chair of COO Civic Future, founder of the Government Skills Campus and Leadership College for Government. Right. There were a bunch of other people on there as well. There was sort of 8 people on the panel.
Yeah.
And then there were contributors, of which you were one.
I was one.
I'm in the presence of greatness.
Thank you for the platforming. Yes. And
when did you do that?
Will have been around November, December time, I think. And what I can say, yes, I know that they consulted with a really wide range of people. So they were wanting to speak with some EDI consultants, and which I was one. And I know that 100 and odd people and different organisations have contributed to it. My impression, of the process, that it was very fair and very diverse. And I was able to say whatever I liked on this little Zoom call that Pamela Dow chaired with a small group of us. So she met a lot of different groups of people. I think a lot of work has gone into this, kind of really quite to get very different and diverse perspectives on what's going well and what's not going so well.
How long did you speak for, if you don't mind me asking? And can I ask what you said, or is it like secret?
Oh gosh, it's not secret. I've said some of it probably already on our podcast, but I think gosh, I don't know, an hour and a half, something like that. It was like a Zoom call.
You didn't talk for an hour and a half.
No, I didn't personally talk for an hour and a half.
Sorry,
but that's
I would listen to you for an hour and a half, and I'm not sure what else you
well, you've got to. You've got to, because we're doing this together. But it was just contributions from, I don't know, there were maybe 10 or 12 people on that call. So
you structured your response, or it was just a conversational kind of?
It was fairly structured. We were given some kind of prompt materials, if you like, in the first place, i.e. what the brief was. We were given in advance what the brief of the whole piece of work was, and the kind of questions that they were asking and wanting to look at. So we were given those, and so had a kind of heads up. But then the conversation was pretty free forming after that, as conversations go. It was just a good chance to chat with other professionals as well, and see what people felt, what kind of the impressions were. The kinds of things I said, it's a while ago, but I do remember saying something that we've talked about here as the kind of the getting in external trainers as being a bit of a and I've forgotten the phrase I used, but a bit of a Wild West. That's what I've used. And I remember using that within the space, and I was told that is not, I wasn't the first person to use that term as well.
I thought you were going to say you got ticked off for being too conversational, but they were into the Wild West idea.
No, they were into the Wild West idea. It wasn't stuffy at all. It was very informal, and you did feel that you could genuinely say what you wanted to say. So pointing out the good stuff and the challenges. So yeah, it's too long ago now to remember all the detail, but I do remember saying that. So it felt very positive, and it felt very fair. And we were also asked, if you know other people that would like to contribute, put us in touch. So it was a very open process, which felt extraordinarily positive. For something like that, you do need to get as diverse a kind of set of voices in the space and kind of inputting. And I think you can see that in the kind of report that is come out. I think you can see those different voices in there as well.
Good. All right. Well, that's really good to hear. I didn't know that. So thank you for that. It was rather mysterious how these things are put together. So, so in terms of our kind of initial responses to it, I don't know how much of it you felt was what you were expecting, considering what you had chipped in. I mean, I guess you didn't really have any idea what it was going to look like, did you? Or how long it was going to be or anything like that. It's not super long. What is it, 40 pages or so?
Yeah, something like that.
It's quite readable, isn't it?
I found it very readable. My initial response was, this is really accessible, which is fantastic. I felt it. I mean, I'm so sad that I felt it was a page turner. Other people won't feel that. But I found it fascinating, actually. And yes, you don't know when you contribute in a small way to a consultation what's going to come out of it. I guess I got a bit of a vibe. But my initial response to it is that it is positive in really wanting to make sure that the work that we do in DEI is evidence-based, that it is positive, that it is having the impacts that we want it to have. And so it feels like a very, a great comprehensive piece of work, comprehensive piece of research. So my initial response is it's very positive. I also think it is very challenging to the DEI industry, or some aspects of the DEI industry, who will find this a bit of a challenge because of its, its kind of gentle critique, I suppose, or perhaps not so gentle critique of those measures that are put in place that don't have any evidence for working, and that don't have any data behind them, or sort of evidence base. And I think we do see some of that. It's what we would sometimes call the cosmetic stuff or the performative stuff, if that's not tied down and tethered to a reason for it to be happening. So I think some of it will be a challenge to, I think it will be a challenge to the DEI industry. It's trying to make things happen a little bit differently in the UK. Some organisations are doing this stuff and so won't be challenged by it, but others are not. I don't know, what was your response, Tanya? You've had a read of it as well.
Yeah. It's not what I expected, to be honest. It was because I think probably, I don't know, I wasn't sure whether it was going to have more of a sort of political angle to it. And I know that we'll talk in a minute about how it's been received, but given that sort of government thing, I thought it was going to have quite an obvious bias in some direction or another. What I was struck by was how independent it is. I think it's quite harsh. I think it's quite clear. I think bits of it are frankly a bit embarrassing for the industry and should prompt some self-reflection, which I think is much needed.
Yeah.
I think what came across to me, I guess, in one of the early sections was about definitions of words and concepts. I was really struck by in the very, very early pages that they got, seemed to be, and even we couldn't even get a definition of diversity or inclusion, or equality or equity. And so they kept saying things like that these definitions are contested, ambiguous, conflated, evolving. So the whole thing to me just felt like they had got a handle on the sort of slipperiness of it, which I think you and I have talked about before. Yeah. The sort of like, we're not even all agreed on what we're talking about here, which I don't think reflects terribly well on us as an industry, if I can be honest.
Yeah.
If we're all talking at cross purposes, what are we doing? And I felt a little bit like, it was a bit like a sort of teacher reading your homework that, you hadn't really tried that hard on, and they were just kind of coming back and going, well, this is a bit of a mess, isn't it? And it was quite, sort of a D-, really. Or maybe that's a bit harsh, but it felt like someone had gone through it and gone, what is going on in this industry? Like, what do you mean there's no evidence for some of this stuff? What are you guys doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is not terribly flattering, in all honesty, but I think it's probably something that we need to listen to. And I guess we can challenge that if we don't think it's true. If we don't think it's true, why don't we think it's true? And do we have evidence to present to say that it's not true? It seems like there's a lot of decent evidence in here, but I just felt Yeah, and there was, there were quite a lot of, there was a bit in it at the very beginning. It says, the research also found that the UK employs almost twice as many D&I workers per 10,000 employees as any other country. And that just really stood out to me because I
Yeah.
thought that we'd imported DEI, they call it D and I in this report. I thought we'd imported that from America, and that I don't know, I just didn't have any idea that we were kind of more into this in some ways than any other country. And we didn't, I mean, I don't know if there's any reason, I can't think of any reason that jumps out at me as to why we would have gone so big on this. Why have we created so many jobs around this in proportion to our own workforce? Have you got any thoughts on that?
I'm as stumped by it as you are, really, as to why we have gone to such a scale. And the first time I saw that data was in, preparing for that conversation as part of the consultation. I hadn't seen that information. So yeah, across all countries, we are more than twice as many kind of per head of nation than anyone else. I do not know. It would be entirely speculative to say like why we have gone so large. Do we have a particular need in this country? Unlikely that we're any different from, or much different from particularly anywhere in Europe, for example. So I don't know why we've taken it on so massively, and others
I
have
only
not.
imagine it's something cultural, but I can't quite think what that would be. I would love to see some more data on that. It also says,
I would love to see data on it, and if listeners have got any thoughts, kind of let us know, because I know we've both been a bit puzzled by that.
And then it said another estimate based on freedom of information requests to 6,000 public authorities cites the existence of approximately 10,000 public D&I jobs at a cost of £557 million a year to the UK taxpayer. That sounds like a hell of a lot to me. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing which gives all sorts of bits of the press, ammunition to throw at us when they're saying, where is this money going? So if it's with, particularly if it's in hospitals or those sorts of things where people are saying, what are these people doing? Why isn't that money going to the actual services themselves? It's, we're going to have to answer questions about where that money is going, particularly public sector, I think, because it's taxpayer money.
I think this is again where we need an evidence base for that very issue. For example, if I know, or if I were to know that DEI people in the NHS were working closely in terms of health inequalities, for example, I'd be 100% like, yes, this is where we need to be putting that resource and putting that money. If it's working on patient health inequalities, because that has a massive impact, obviously not only on people's lives and health, but it has a massive impact on the economy, on helping social mobility and everything.
Yeah, it's just fair to ask where that money's going, isn't it?
It's absolutely fair to ask those questions. And to be honest, those answers may be transparently out there. It's just that they're not in my back pocket right now.
So I think there are a few troubling questions, but I don't think it wasn't like it was all bad. And I think what also really came across is that everyone's trying to do the right thing. People are trying to, there are good intentions. There are reasons to do this. There are good reasons to do this.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's anti-DEI. It's just like trying to get some data back in the room, trying to get cool heads, trying to make sure that we've got proper strategy here and we're testing things and we know that what we're doing is a good use of money,
exactly,
good use of time, and that we're bringing everybody with us, which I think feels reasonable
absolutely
to me.
And it's not anti-DEI at all. I mean, I know just before this conversation, you were telling me that you were at an event at the weekend where somebody expressed something referring to it as Kemi's report or something.
Yeah, Kemi's diversity report, because I mentioned that I work in DEI.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff is, there's some good stuff going on, but also some of it's, need to look at some of it a bit more carefully. And the person I was talking to said, oh, you mean Kemi's DEI report? And did a sort of eye roll. I wasn't quite sure what to make of the eye roll.
Yeah.
But I just kind of thought, ooh, actually, is this becoming known as, Kemi's diversity report? And I think that's kind of a shame, because whether you like her or you don't like her, the fact that this feels like a political report, I think, doesn't really reflect the contents of it.
No.
So I would hope that people won't dismiss it, particularly people who don't particularly like her for various reasons.
Yeah.
I think it's a mistake. I think it's really actually, frankly, pretty studenty to dismiss it on the grounds that you don't like Kemi. Frankly, I think we need to get over ourselves and be like, what's in it? And then I can decide if I think it's a well-written report or not. There isn't anything by her in the report. There's no letter from her or anything.
No.
So,
yeah, it's not her report. Yeah, she commissioned it in her role as Minister for Women and Equalities. As whatever. I know that she's a controversial figure for many people, but it is an independent report, and it's very kind of well researched and well evidenced, as you would hope. So I thought, because we've noticed like the reception, such as it is, has been quite interesting so far. I mean, it only came out on Wednesday, and we're recording this on Monday. So because we knew we wanted to talk about it, we've obviously were quite speedy at reading it. So we're only a few days in, actually, frankly, for when it's been out there. But I know we've seen a response in The Guardian by Nels Abbey, who referred to it as being some part of Kemi Badenoch's anti-woke wave. And, he really, to my view, didn't get the measure of the report at all, and didn't say what it's actually asking for, as in an evidence base. He talked about how it was wanting NOTs to have diversity schemes, and it doesn't say that at all. So it was just a really weird uptake. Obviously, that's one person's opinion, a Guardian.
I don't think he's an HR guy, is he?
He's not. No, I think he's written books on race before, but he's not kind of in the HR world or kind of consultancy world, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, I think it was an opinion piece.
It was an opinion piece. Yeah.
I've just got it here.
But I actually was thinking, did you read the same report I did?
Yeah.
When I read that piece,
Nels Abbey is a writer, a writer, broadcaster, and a former banker with and the author of Think Like a White Man. His new book, The Hip Hop MBA: Lessons in Cutthroat Capitalism from Raps Moguls, is out in April. I don't know anything about him other than that.
No, I don't know anything.
But he doesn't sound like he's an HR person. But he had. He had some strong opinions on it, and that's fair enough.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I just would have preferred to see something, I think, by an HR or DEI person that was kind of more working on the ground. It seemed to be, it was quite. He's obviously not a big fan of Kemi, so fair enough. But yeah, I'm not sure that it was very reflective. And then on, I suppose, the other side, there was a piece by Simon Fanshawe, who I think was one of the founders of Stonewall and is now an independent DEI consultant.
Yeah.
He's very big on a more conciliatory approach to DEI and getting everybody to share their kind of what they've all got in common and less sort of divisive and that kind of thing. He wrote quite a good piece, I thought, in the Sunday Times. Very good piece, in fact, in case he's listening. Very good piece, Simon, in Sunday Times. It was a very good piece, which I thought was very balanced as well. And he was very positive about the report, I think.
Yeah, he was. He was grateful for the report coming because I know that he is, I've read his book, which of course I can't remember now the name of it, but his recent book, which is, and it's very much about an evidence base and about a measured approach and about getting all voices in the room. It's something like The Power of Difference.
The Power of Difference, that's right.
I remembered it. But yeah, so and it's a very valuable approach, which actually aligns with this report, I think. So it's no wonder that he gave it a kind of positive review.
So how has it landed on LinkedIn, do you feel? Because I know you were in a big rush to read it. I know you put it in your diary. You put it in your diary, didn't you? Because you were so sure it was going to be a big rush. You wanted to make sure you read it.
This is so sad. You weren't meant to say this, Tanya, in public. But yeah, I had it in my diary the date that it was coming out.
What did it say in your diary, Julie?
I'm going to look at my diary now. It just said something really sad. It just said government inclusion report. It just, I just had it on the day it was coming out. And then sadly, I was doing nothing on Friday night. So I read it on Friday night when it came out on Wednesday. So, it was me and my cat enjoying the page turner of This Is My Life, everybody. But yeah, I was excited to read it. We've all got to be.
Well, you were in it.
No, but we've all got to be. But to answer your question is, how has it been received? Kind of on LinkedIn, which obviously we're both obsessed with, it's been received silently. Basically,
Oh,
I haven't seen much conversation about it at all. People understandably may not have read it yet. As I say, it's only a few days ago. But I think it's interesting that it is... seems to either, I don't know, is it being purposely ignored, or is it being just not talked about? Would there be political reasons for that? I would encourage anybody listening to this call. It is an easier read than you think it's going to be. And it's also, it's interesting and sensible. For the most part, it is really sensible stuff that I think we all need to be taking on board in the industry. So I have been surprised that there hasn't been more conversation publicly on the sort of social media where we hang out quite a bit. It's been an interesting one.
Yeah, a little bit odd. Let's hope it's because they're all busy reading it. I mean, it did land midweek, I suppose.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they didn't all have it in their diaries, so they didn't all have the time blocks out
What,
like you did.
what can I say? This tells you a lot about me, maybe too much about me.
Yeah. So let's talk. We're talking a little bit about kind of what we think might be the fallout and repercussions of it, and what we think is going to maybe be the direction of travel after that. But I think it would be actually really helpful, given that you have done the reading, if you could sort of talk us through. I know you've got like 5 main points of what you wanted to pull out from the kind of middle of the report, I guess, if you like.
Yeah. I just wrote down for myself 5 headlines after I read the report. So they're from various kind of places in the report, but also kind of overarching. So let's chat about each of them if you fancy. So the first headline for me, number 1, is the massive thing that comes out of it is a call for evidence-based initiatives, evidence-based, research-based. And for me, there was a mention in the report, there was a shocking number of organisations doing DEI work that are not using any kind of baseline. They're not using their own baselines or even monitoring the initiatives. And this came from the CIPD Inclusion at Work report, which is what they've referred to which came out in 2022, where 1 in 4 employers who answered that report, and I think it was answered that research, about 2,000 employers, 1 in 4 with a DEI strategy were not evaluating it. That just seems extraordinary. And then the second thing...
Not at all. Sound like
and the second thing was 38% of organisations are collecting equal opportunity data from employees or job applicants. So only 38% are collecting that data. So both of those things are saying to me, you can't create an evidence base, or know even what your starting point is in order to begin a DEI journey. You haven't even got any kind of, baseline. So I found that shocking, frankly. And so what the report is doing is calling for evidence-based initiatives. And that just is hard to argue with. Like, I think really hard to argue with. There's nothing controversial about it, I would hope.
Yeah. I guess, is it because people are thinking, well, it's the right thing to do, so we don't need evidence?
Yeah.
Something like that.
I think there's a sort of moral, in inverted commas, / ethical impulse to DEI work, and that sometimes perhaps that has taken over and takes over what sometimes it might take over like what actually works and what is actually beneficial for your particular organization and your particular context, because it's the right thing to do, or it feels the right thing to do. Also, putting some things on, such as training or events, for example, and these are mentioned in the report, it shows that you're doing something. It's visible, it's kind of out there and it's sort of public, but there might not be a kind of proper foundation or a proper route as to why you're doing that and why that's the right thing to do in your organization. So it may feel like, oh, we need to do something, so we'll do something. And I think that there is that kind of potentially a knee-jerk to it, but it can't be effective.
Do you think that some of this is a sort of feel-good factor, given the nature of the sort of thing that we're talking about, which feels quite fun and everyone loved it and everyone had a great day and everyone got great feedback? It's too it's just too subjective. It's just like, that's not really data. I mean, that's some kind of data, but it's not enough data to say, did it deliver value?
Yeah.
Has it changed anything?
I mean,
just because everyone had a fun time.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because if you were doing some sort of measurement around that, you might be measuring workplace culture, for example. So you might put on some events and you might kind of think about how, is this really helping to create a sort of inclusive workplace culture? But you would need to be monitoring it. You would need to be evaluating it. There needs to be a plan behind it, really. Otherwise, you just don't know. It's like throwing, putting your finger in the breeze or something and hope that you're hitting something. So part of, another hat that I wear, or a related hat, is to do monitoring and evaluation for organizations. And it just seems extraordinary that, well, it's not extraordinary, but I guess I kind of know that it happens, but that you would put money into something and put time into something, not knowing why you're doing it. Other than that feel good factor, as you say. Some people might have a good time, but how impactful is that really in your DEI efforts, and how helpful is it in terms of your workplace culture and creating that inclusive culture, which would be one of the reasons for putting on some events or whatever.
Okay, so that was the first point. Was that the second point?
That was the first point. I've just
go on. Go into the second point. If you're done with that first one, I'm enjoying it.
That was the biggest.
I'm just trying to keep track.
that was the biggest one. The others are a little bit smaller, but that's kind of the key headline. So headline number 2 for me was organizations are doing stuff sometimes that is pretty much evidence not to work. So there's quite a lot of, there's a lot of evidence, for example, that unconscious bias training does not work on its own. On the government website, in fact, this is, probably about 10 years old now, but they did a literature review of all the academic research out there, plus other research, grey kind of literature, as it's called, that tells us unconscious bias training doesn't work, particularly when it's delivered on its own, in isolation, not thinking about other forms of bias, etc. And yet people are still doing it despite that evidence. So it's at best, it's kind of a waste of time. At worst, you might actually be just causing damage and kind of causing annoyance in some ways. And that's where your point there about the sort of the feel good factor, that it might feel good to be doing something. Everybody's heard of unconscious bias. I do training around unconscious bias in complement with other things. You need to think about it in relation to the structural biases and those bigger pictures as well.
Which you wouldn't do it on its own?
No, I don't do it on its own. I do get asked to do it, and I say you need to talk about bias in a much bigger kind of frame, and then I'll do it. But because there's evidence out there. Some of what the evidence suggests is that it can be harmful, and it can actually make people feel, oh, it's unconscious, that means I can't do anything about it, or that's just the way it is, etc., etc. So it can actually be harmful delivered on its own. So you need to think about it if you want to think about it, and if there's a reason for you to be thinking about it, you need to think about it in terms of bias in a much bigger frame. So thinking about bias in your processes and etc. It's not always just down to individuals, as unconscious bias can potentially be understood as. So it needs to be just delivered very carefully, frankly.
Okay. So that's not great news either. We're actually doing some stuff that's actively bad. Okay, brilliant. Oh dear. Okay. Are we doing anything right? No, the next one's not positive either.
You know what my next one is. So number 3. Number 3, some activity, not most obviously, but some activity is actively unlawful. And they use the examples of the recent gender critical tribunals, successful employment tribunals, where people have successfully demonstrated that they've been discriminated against by their employers, often by their employers wanting to do good things. It often comes out of DEI training, which isn't balanced. It isn't balanced, or it isn't moderate in some respects. They also give the example, they give a couple of examples, but one of the other kind of key big ones that I was familiar with was the RAF discrimination case, where they got it incredibly wrong in terms of affirmative action, wasn't it? That they
Positive discrimination.
they did positive discrimination instead.
What they should have done was positive action.
Yeah, that's right.
But they made a mess of it. They made a mess of it because they actually created a barrier before selection. Before recruitment, which involved I think you had to do a training scheme to in order to be considered for the role, and you could only get on the training scheme if you were from some of these groups. So that's how they messed it up. Right? But it's known to be a complete clanger. It's known as being probably the worst example of the biggest mistake anybody's made publicly that we know of.
Yeah, publicly that we know of.
But it was a shocker.
And, so they use that as an example. There's a couple of other examples in there as well where, these are people trying to get things right, trying to do what they think is the best thing, but that it backfires enormously if you really don't know what you're doing. Or kind of.
There's a section. Can I read out the section?
Go ahead.
The section from that first bit is quite near the start, kind of near section 4 that we talked about. Was it says increasingly issues of freedom of speech and expression affect D&I debates in the workplace, exacerbated by recent high-profile court cases. Non-legally trained managers and leaders are finding it hard to navigate the Equality Act and associated duties. People mentioned fear of legal action, conflicting or unclear HR policies, and that definitions of bullying, harassment, and discrimination are becoming weaponized, that's in quotes, weaponized, in employment grievances and preemptive HR or legal advice. A number of participants suggested that employers, in an attempt to go, in quotes, above and beyond the law in their usual D&I efforts, brackets, albeit with good intentions, were inadvertently breaking the law. Yikes.
Yeah. It is.
Yikes. That sounds like a mess to me.
Yeah.
That sounds like we've got people that don't understand the law, who are making decisions day to day on the ground with their teams, and they don't know what they're doing. And they're frightened, but they don't have the information they need to be able to make these decisions.
Yes.
That's quite concerning, I think.
I think it is. It's more than quite concerning. It's a huge mess, and it's why we are getting the successful cases coming through. This shouldn't be happening. People shouldn't be discriminated against by their employers because of of their beliefs, particularly when it's been a result of DEI initiatives that have gone awry, which is where I'm reading that sort of sense of giving one perspective. If we're thinking about the gender critical cases, for example, if your employers had one set of training in giving particular views about gender identity, for example, but not permitting or allowing people to have a different view or a different perspective on what is actually, genuinely quite a contentious issue, then people are starting to be, they're getting themselves into sort of really hot water if you're not allowing people to have their own perspectives. And this is where we've got the cases of discrimination have been successful. Obviously, that's kind of a bigger build than one piece of training, but it's giving a context of where that employee has not been able to be themselves in a workplace.
I wasn't. There's a little bit quite near that section, which I wasn't quite sure whether it was saying, is there confusion about whether or not this is managers' responsibility, the details of this. It says, we believe that, this is all just in running copy, not in quotes or anything. We believe, presumably the panel, that while employers have a duty to fully grasp and apply the law, leaders and managers should not be expected to possess a sophisticated knowledge of the demographic, historical, and socioeconomic debates relating to the relative advantage and disadvantages between groups. Nor, crucially, should they outsource or delegate this to those with potentially conflicting incentives. Now, I suppose that means we expect you to have a basic grasp of the law, but we think you're getting into a mess with trying to be an expert on all the historical and cultural reasons why some people hold different beliefs and why some behaviour is difficult for some people and problematic for other people, and what's okay and what's not okay. I think it's a little bit, I feel for the employers on that one, because I don't know, that's a lot to kind of untangle, I suppose.
Yeah.
A basic understanding of the law is a great start.
Yes, it is.
But the rest of it, I can see how employers are getting tangled up with this.
Yeah. I think DEI it has that socio-political angle when, if ever we're talking about, if we spot that people from particular demographics as groups of people might be being treated differently, then we are already sort of thinking about almost a socio-political category of some sort. So this is where that boundary between, okay, what's the workplace's responsibility in relation to that, and what's the external world social kind of responsibility is really tricky for, how much do we expect a senior manager to understand? Let's say you're a manager in tech, for example. How much do we expect them to understand, or kind of be really kind of fluent on in terms of, the kind of debates around gender or debates around race or disability, etc. We would expect some sort of element of being informed. But what we're seeing is that is perhaps potentially overstepping some of the basics here in terms of knowing the law and knowing your position in relation to the law and what your responsibilities are.
Do you know what that makes me think of is when we spoke to, because we've been talking to lots of HR directors recently, haven't we, about various parts of inclusion which they think are going a little bit off the rails. And there's this idea that because people don't actually know the law and some of these topics are so emotive, that they're basically making decisions, day-to-day decisions, based on what, and I put this in air quotes, what feels legal.
Oh, yes, I know.
And that's the kind of, so that's how I think it's getting tangled up here. With that, and that feels like a training thing to me. I don't know, I can't think of any other way to get through that one than untangling what's happening and saying, I know someone's upset, but that doesn't necessarily mean that anybody's broken any actual, that it's unlawful for, whatever happened to happen. And therefore we need a non-legal type response to this before we jump to, anybody talking about their rights or anything like that. This is not really a rights issue. This is just a row. This is just an unpleasant, nasty thing that happened that everybody wants to find a way through, rather than it being lawyers.
Exactly. That's right. That kind of what feels legal or what feels like it ought to be legal. That the law is actually there. We don't, we can campaign in different ways if you want to change laws, but not, you can't use your workplace really to do it, I don't think, unless your workplace is a very particular kind of campaigning organisation. I think what you're saying there is, this is, it's a huge expectations for people to manage all of that, both for HR people, but also, kind of team leaders and that kind of thing.
Well, I don't know. I think you're being you're being too kind. I don't think it's a huge expectation of them to know the law,
I know, I agree with you, not about the law. I guess my mind was going into that, the sort of socio-political edge of this.
Yes.
I think that is a tricky boundary, and I think that where some of these cases have gone awry, it's where that boundary's gone way, way, way overstepped. So that needs to be pulled back, and so I absolutely agree. People need to know the law, just in the way that I'm big on the evidence base. It's also we need to know the Equality Act. We need to know how that pertains in the law, what in workplaces, whatever your role is, basically.
I mean, there's a few good examples of that, I would say. There's like, things like the number of firms that say they have a zero tolerance approach to certain behaviours. And we saw with the Lloyds Banking Group case, that he ended up being dismissed. And actually, I think, as I understand it, it turned out that Lloyds, that was considered sort of overreaction, and that given the circumstances of that particular case, other options were available to Lloyds Banking Group, which they did not take. And it was because the particular word that he used was that employee used in that training session was a sort of completely unacceptable word, and they just jumped to that. However, I think, as I understand it, the court decided that under the circumstances, it was not, that the other responses were available to Lloyds and they didn't take them. So that's probably a good example of like a horrible incident that everybody, everybody was very upset about, and it felt like the right thing to do to just get rid of this guy. But actually, it turned out in those particular circumstances, that particular situation, that wasn't the right thing for Lloyds to have
Yeah, and
done.
that was an interesting case because it was two different protected characteristics, race kind of versus disabilities, as it were, and they're always really complex. So he used a word in the training session that was an inappropriate word, and then used his a very offensive word. But as part of his disability, it had come out that he was dyslexic, and it's sort of that kind of neurodivergence. I'd love to pick up on what you just said there about zero tolerance, because it is a phrase that we see kind of being written into more and more policies, I think. And this is another thing that is coming from a good place. You know, we don't want sexism in the workplace. We don't want racism or homophobia. So it feels good to say, it's zero tolerance. What you can, if you're writing that into policies, what we're seeing, as with that example with Lloyds Bank, is that does this then put you into a really harsh kind of robust process when actually it might be someone's mistake, as a kind of a genuine, not coming from a place of kind of forceful discrimination. Again, there needs to be some boundary and kind of some sense placed around that. And I think for organisations that are putting zero tolerance, it sounds like, yeah, fantastic. Of course, we don't want any racism in the workplace. Of course we don't. Nobody actually wants that. But what does that meaningfully look like if you have an incident where someone has said something? Where does having the zero tolerance take you with that? Does that mean instant dismissal, or does it mean does it mean something else? Does it mean mediation? Does it mean conversation, training, or trying to kind of help understand? So I can see where it comes from, but we're seeing in situations like that where it feels like it has not been helpful to have that term in there.
Okay. So that was, I think, number 3. That was a big one in the end. We got ourselves all worked up.
We got a bit excited about it, didn't we? See, it's not just me on my Friday night.
One for us. No, I love it. Come on. Right, so number 4.
Number 4, we're coming to, and this is a call for a development of a tool which is accessible to all, that will cumulatively record what works and what doesn't work. Now, this is based on an example of something that is the Education Endowment Foundation Toolkit. And this is a scheme. It's really worth reading the report to have a little look at this. I have that little screenshots of what this looks like. So they're saying, could we do something like this for diversity and inclusion, which would look like a good thing? So what that does, that tool, is helps record, as evidence becomes clear about what works and what doesn't work. In this case, it would be with DEI. It's all recorded on this tool. So you need kind of the education tool was developed with Durham University. So you need a good, a robust research partner that will help you develop this. So it will then, as you kind of populate the tool with all of the evidence of things that work, and these would be through robust research studies, etc., you get cumulatively, okay, so as an organization, you can then go along, you can go and look at this tool and say, the problem that you've got because you're collecting your evidence now because you've been told to. And the problem that you've got, you've defined it as a problem. You'd like to find out, okay, what could be the solutions for this? And you get on this tool how much this particular solution kind of costs, broad brush, how effective it is, what kind of organizations it might work for. So you've got something kind of a ready-made template of which stops you going down dead ends, faffing about, frankly. That if you had something like this in the DEI world, I think it would be very positive. I wouldn't want it to stop innovation, so you'd need to be able to try out innovative things, but then also populate the tool with that as well. So it's...
is this the kind of thing that could be used for employers to evaluate external
Yep.
suppliers and external training providers and things like
Definitely.
that. So that would make them have to pull their socks up and make sure they've got their data ready and they can show how effective they are, rather than this kind of wing and a prayer and it
I
feels
think it
feels
would
right
mention
stuff.
you wouldn't need to show your own data, as it were, as a consultant necessarily, although you might wish to. But what if you're taking a particular approach which has been validated and is kind of evidence based already in that tool, and you're saying, well, this is the approach that I take, and this is, you can see how kind of effective that is. So those are. External consultants and trainers are mentioned in the report in that respect, that we would obviously needs to be aligning ourselves with knowing what works and with aligning our methods and our strategies so that we'd all be working together, the organisation, the consultant, and the, with that kind of looking at that same toolkit and using it.
So this tool is instead of, I think, I understood, correct me if I'm wrong, that the original idea for this report was looking at the possibility of developing a new sort of diversity scheme or kitemark, which was going to, they call it a new inclusion confidence scheme, complementing other such kitemarks embedded in the first in the civil service and public sector. It sounds to me like they've dumped that idea, because actually the panel were like, the last thing we need is another scheme. We don't need any more kite marks. It sounds like, I thought it was quite interesting that they've had the guts to say, I know that was one of the aims, but actually we think it's a dud and we actually think there's a better way to do it, which I really like, because they were thinking outside the box rather than just go, oh, well, let's come up with a scheme. We were told to do a scheme. So a tool feels a little bit more like something which people can map onto what they've already got, and then you just know whether your scheme is any good or not, and if it's not, you need to change it.
Exactly. And I think it is kind of bold that we were asked to sort of explore a scheme, and they've said the scheme isn't going to work, and instead this toolkit, because it's quite a novel idea, and it's great that there is an example where it has been working in their Education Endowment Foundation. And I think very positive, and I think it would be novel. It would give people confidence in the interventions. It would make sure that resources are not wasted, that people's time is not wasted, provided that tool is robust, as you would hope it would be if it has a good research partner that's helping to create it, and it will build over time. So we will see stuff that we're doing now that might be quite novel and quite new. We'll see in 5 years time, 10 years time, the kind of impact that it's had, and that it's kind of you're doing a live experiment is coming to the mind. It's not really an experiment, but live analysis and live kind of evaluation of everything as it develops, which is just when you're into monitoring and evaluation, which slightly nerdy I am, I mean, that's just the ideal way. It's never ending. It is a constant, you're always monitoring, you're always evaluating, you're always continuously improving based on the data that you've got. I think it's very promising.
Yeah. It seems quite odd to me that we've moved so far away from data, because my experience is more within recruitment, really. But with recruitment, they're very big on data. They're very big on, where did we lose our candidates from that background? They didn't like question 2 in the interview. Like, you can really go back and be quite forensic about that stuff, and they really do, or the big employers do anyway. So I'm not quite sure why there's an exception for DEI other than what we discussed. It seems like it just seems unusual for anything that comes under HR to be have wandered quite so far from data.
And I mean, I was surprised at reading some of the stuff in the report that they cite from the CIPD, because organisations that I've worked with on the whole are very good with their data, or at least where they know that they're not collecting the data, they're trying to find a method to do it. My background is mostly universities, and there are schemes there that really require robust data before you kind of make any evidence. So I've kind of grown up with, I suppose, that approach. So I've been shocked, actually, at some of what's in the report in terms of the levels of, we're just doing stuff, and just doing stuff. Just
see how it goes.
We want to throw a bit of money at something. It feels kind of quite extraordinary. Right, I've been shocked like you, and I guess that's maybe some of the organisations that I work with. Perhaps I've just been fortunate that I don't really see that kind of approach, but clearly it's out there, and in fact, clearly what that CIPD report suggested, that the majority of people are doing stuff like that.
that I think was actually point number 5, wasn't it?
Yes, we're moving into point number 5 for me, which was, organizations need to collect their own data and analyze their own data, because all organizations are different. You know, if you're a small charity, or if you're a big corporate, or if you're working in, a particular geographical reason, etc., etc. So you do need to have your own baseline. And what they're saying is kind of not guessing at the problems. You need to know what the problems are before you address them. So not necessarily kind of guessing and thinking, oh, well, these broader socio-political things we know that are out there. How are they impacting on your organization? They may be impacting on it in ways that you don't know about, which is why we have the importance of that kind of personalized data, as it were, in terms of your own organization, is very important. And that takes resource. That really does take resource, which is, I think, also a reason that people don't do it. To create a baseline, you're looking at collecting a lot of quantitative data, also ideally qualitative data from your employees and potential recruiters, potential employees, sorry, etc. So there isn't any shortcut for that. But once you've got your baseline, each year or each couple of years or whatever, and you're kind of assessing against that, you see your progress. This is the only way, or you see if you're not making progress, it's like, okay, we need to change our actions. There isn't a shortcut, but I think it is because it's deep and it takes resource initially. But then we're thinking about how much resource might you be putting into, I'm going to say meaningless in air quotes, activities that you don't know the effect of, like, or that might not actually be adding anything. So over time, you will benefit from putting that initial resource in.
Yeah. Maybe that'll be good news for them. Okay, so those are your 5 points. Well done. Thank you very much.
There are more than 5 points, but I held off with the top 5 for me.
Those are the highlights.
And you've brought out some lovely
themes.
quotes actually from the report, which also I think will help people get a sort of sense of the flavour of it.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's not anti-DEI. No. It's just, can we do this better, guys? Because this is a bit of a model in places. That's
you
what
get
I got
a real
from
sense of commitment to EDI from it. Actually, real sense, because
you do.
You wouldn't get people going to these lengths to really look at the industry and look at what's going on if they didn't want to, like, to make an impact for DEI is important.
Yeah, no, there are some really positive bits as well about it. It's definitely not the anti-DEI report, that's for sure.
Definitely not.
It's just asking us to get it together.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, because I'm just a little bit conscious of time. I know we're going to do a deep dive, so I hope people had settled in with a cup of coffee for this one. But now we're coming to the end of this one. Let's just talk a little bit about what next and where we think HR and DEI are going to go from here, and what our predictions are. What are your thoughts? I mean, we said we're not sure how it's landed yet. Well, it remains to be seen. There are no massively obvious visible signs yet of how it's landed. Where are you on predictions?
I mean, I guess what I would hope is happening is that EDI people, HR people are reading it and are going to have conversations about it. I would hope also that that it's taken on board in these kind of different networks and organizations that work on DEI sort of together and collaboratively together. It is a critique of what is going on currently in some spheres. So there needs to be an open conversation and acknowledgement of the things that as an industry we have been doing that are not working. So I would hope that is what happens. At the moment, it's very quiet, but I think DEI people within organizations, I would hope, are reading it, absorbing it. And I certainly think and hope that HRDs will be wanting a report on it. As I know, you and I have discussed that, sort of wanting to understand what are the implications for our organization and what are we doing around this.
Yeah. I don't think it would be a great look for I don't know about these things. Can't imagine it'd be a great look for a head of DEI to say, "Oh, I'm not going to bother to read that," and then have their HRD say, "Hey, have you read the report? What do you think?" And they go, "Oh, I'm not bothering because it was Kemi's." I can't imagine that being the answer that the HRD is going to be looking for. I think the HR directors are going to be hotter on it than the DEI leads think they're going to be. That would be my prediction. Several reasons for that. I think I get the sense that quite a few HR directors are looking at DEI more closely anyway, and looking at their heads of DEI and whether they can trust this person and whether they really know what they're doing, which I think is a fair question, and maybe they can. But I think they want to feel confident in that person. And I think coming back and saying, "Oh no, I haven't bothered to read it because it's a government thing, and we hate the Tories or whatever," is not going to fly. And I mean, I'm giving them a hard time, but if that kind of Kemi eye roll is not going to fly, and I think also I get the sense from HR directors that they're really in no mood to have any more hassle this year than they've already got. They've already got plenty on their plate. They're probably doing restructures and redundancies. The last thing they need is more grievances and legal hassles. So I get the feeling that they're going to want to clamp down on this stuff and make sure that their head of DEI is not giving them extra problems. And also, of course, all of this moving towards a more, if you're talking about more effective strategy, you're talking about also more effective use of resources. So this is potentially a cost saving for most big employers who may be overspending on DEI at the moment. And this is quite an easy way to save a few pennies, frankly, as 2024 gets underway and we head into 2025. If it was me, I would be saying this is a very obvious way to make sure that we can reduce spend if we possibly can, whilst retaining the feel-good factor ideally, but not spending money on stuff that doesn't work, certainly stuff that doesn't make anything better or that makes it worse and that gives legal risk to the organisation. That's just nuts. That's a terrible spending decision.
The legal risk factor is huge, and I think you're absolutely right, just in terms of, again, it's about evidence-based, isn't it? It's also about what are the activities that we're doing, what's the EDI lead doing. I know that EDI leads are responsible for budgets, and so they have their that sort of stuff will be monitored, but it will be I think good for HRDs to be asking those questions. And if we're looking, if what emerges from this report is a slightly different direction of travel, organizations would be wise to start looking at it now, to see, okay, where are we matching up with this? What, and where are we not? It's kind of that evaluation piece of, some organizations will be having a robust evidence base. They'll be doing, everything will be tethered to a baseline and kind of a strategy which is being monitored. What we're seeing is that a lot of places are not. So it's like, okay, if we're wanting to make any progress, then we need to be sort of evaluating where we are in relation to this.
Yeah, there was a comment actually below Simon's. I think Simon Fanshawe posted his the link to his Sunday Times piece, and there was a comment from an HR director below that. I'm just going to read it. I won't name her, but she said, HR has always been guilty of chasing fads rather than thinking critically about what is right for the organisation and what has a solid evidence base. I'm afraid this is the latest and possibly most damaging example. HR leaders need to take control of the agenda.
Wow.
That sounds rather ominous to me. But I think the anti-DEI crowd might be quite surprised by, I think there's an idea that all these corporations have lost their marbles over DEI. I don't see that as being true. And I think what we might be about to see is HR directors kind of pulling rank and saying this isn't good for the organisation. I represent the best interests of the organisation in terms of the people function. This isn't working. We need to save money this year. Let's find a new way of doing this. Let's get rid of this. Let's rearrange things. And let's keep the good stuff and hopefully get rid of anything that's not working and spend that more wisely. Not just money, but also people's time. If they're making redundancies elsewhere in the business, they're probably making redundancies within HR as well. These are smaller teams. It doesn't make any sense to be spending money and time on stuff that isn't working. They're not going to keep doing it for long. Why would they do that? it doesn't make any sense. I'm not so good on the public sector, but I can imagine if they're looking to save money as well, and there's increasing pressure, particularly from sort of taxpayer perspective, I can't see anybody that's got tons of extra money at the moment to be spending on stuff that doesn't work. And frankly, this report gives them cover to allow them to say, well, actually, this is the push that we need to get our act together, really, and be clear what we're doing here and why.
The report gives a good frame, or some really good pointers as to what good DEI, as you phrase it, can look like and can be. And so some organisations will be doing that, but some will not be, and those will be the ones that don't see any results of it either. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'd probably be quite worried if I was an external training provider and I didn't have the data to back up the claims about the problem that I'm claiming that my product or service or training is solving, and that there's a measurable difference once I've come in and done my training or sold you my product. We see an awful lot of slightly iffy, I'm not sure about some of the cases for some of these ideas. Even some of the recruitment fairs that I see, I don't know, what problem they're solving necessarily. They think they're solving a problem, bringing in particular groups into the workplace. I'm not sure if they're actually, I don't know if they are effective in doing that, and I don't know if the spend works out. I would like to see some data, and I would imagine that the employers are going to start asking for data, much better data.
I think that question of what is the problem, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Is it something that you as an organisation can solve, or is it a bigger socio-political thing as well, which you might therefore be able to make a small contribution in? But it is, I think it is an impactful report if people take it on board, for consultants, for trainers, working externally, and also for anyone commissioning that training and consultancy, as well as for internal EDI people as well. It's the whole of that kind of industry and the sort of ecosystem, really needs to kind of be taking note of it, I think.
Yeah, and we need to get better definitions of all these things going. I'm just reading again this bit I mentioned at the beginning about the very broad and subjective definitions of inclusion make a precise and useful scheme near impossible. As we show, definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion are contested and can even be legitimately mutually exclusive. Well, that's not good. So I think we're going to need to do a bit of soul searching around that as well. That might be a conversation for another day, Julie.
For another day, yeah. So if listeners have got to this end, well done.
Well, I'm not sure that's the message. We hope you've enjoyed it.
We said,
well, listen, I think there are some geeks out there.
I'm one of them. Look, I'm one of them. I would listen to this.
We'll wave to the geeks. Yeah. Thanks for hanging in, guys. We know you're out there.
We love you too. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll have more conversations about where we think the industry's going very soon. I think it's one to watch for sure. We're definitely at a crossroads. Let's see which way we go.
Yeah. Okay. Great speaking with you.
See how it goes. All right. Good to see you.
Bye for
Thanks,
now.
Julie. Bye.